Somewhere around 100,000 years ago, a human being sat down and had nothing to do.
The hunt was over. The fire was lit. The camp was safe. There was no predator approaching, no food to prepare, no immediate threat demanding attention. And for the first time in the history of our species, a brain that had evolved purely for survival found itself with nothing to survive. What happened next changed everything. We don't usually ask this question. We assume early humans were too busy staying alive to experience anything like boredom. Every moment accounted for, every hour consumed by the brutal arithmetic of prehistoric existence. But that assumption is wrong. And the evidence left behind by people who lived 100,000 years ago tells a story far stranger, far more human, and far more relevant to your life right now than anyone expected.
First, let's establish something about boredom itself. Boredom is not laziness. It is not emptiness. Neuroscientists define it as a specific motivational state, a signal from your brain that your current situation is not providing enough meaningful stimulation and that your cognitive resources could be better used elsewhere. In other words, boredom is your brain telling you it is capable of more than what it is currently doing. It is not a modern invention. It is not a product of smartphones or suburban comfort or 9-to-5 jobs. Boredom is a feature of a sufficiently complex brain, and the human brain became sufficiently complex for boredom long before civilization existed to provide distractions from it. Psychologist Sandy Mann at the University of Central Lancashire has spent years studying boredom and argues that it is one of the most underrated forces in human history. Her conclusion is uncomfortable. Almost every significant cultural and technological leap in human prehistory can be traced, at least in part, to what happened when early humans ran out of things to do. The earliest physical evidence of this comes from a cave in South Africa called Blombos Cave. In 1991, archaeologist Christopher Henshelwood began excavating the site and found something that had no obvious survival value whatsoever. Pieces of ochre, a red-brown mineral pigment, deliberately engraved with geometric patterns, cross-hatched lines, repeated triangles, careful, intentional marks that served no practical function. They were approximately 75,000 years old. Nobody engraves geometric patterns into ochre because they are hungry. Nobody does it because a predator is approaching. Nobody does it because it solves any immediate problem of survival. They did it because their brain had resources left over, because there was time, because the situation was safe enough and the mind restless enough that it reached for something that did not need to exist. This is what boredom produces in a brain complex enough to experience it. Not passivity, not stillness, creation. But the ochre engravings were not the only thing Henshelwood found. In the same cave, at roughly the same age, his team discovered something even more striking. Shells. Tiny marine shells, each one with a deliberate hole punched through it, each one stained with red ochre. They were beads, personal ornaments, objects with no caloric value, no survival function, no practical application whatsoever. Objects whose only purpose was to be seen, to communicate something about the person wearing them to other people looking at them. This is not just craft. This is the beginning of identity, the beginning of the idea that you are a specific person with a specific appearance that you can choose and curate and present to the world.
And it almost certainly began in a quiet moment. A moment when the immediate demands of survival had been met, and a human mind found itself restless and reaching. Archaeologist April Noel at the University of Victoria has studied prehistoric art and ornamentation across dozens of sites spanning multiple continents. Her work points to a pattern that appears again and again across the archaeological record. The most creative leaps, the first appearance of symbolic art, of musical instruments, of long-distance trade networks, of deliberately crafted personal objects, almost never appear during periods of intense environmental stress. They appear during periods of relative stability, when the climate was favorable, when food was adequate, when the group was safe enough that not every waking moment was consumed by immediate crisis. The creativity that built human civilization was not born from desperation. It was born from surplus, from the cognitive space that opens up when survival is temporarily handled and the brain has nowhere urgent to go. Boredom, in the most literal sense, is what gave us art. But early humans didn't just make things when they were bored. They thought. And the thinking they did in those quiet moments produced something that may be the single most important cognitive development in human history. In 2008, psychologist Thomas Suddendorf at the University of Queensland published research on what he calls mental time travel, the ability to project yourself forward into an imagined future and backward into a remembered past, to simulate experiences that are not happening right now, to rehearse scenarios that have not occurred yet. This capacity is extraordinarily rare in the animal kingdom. Most species exist almost entirely in the present tense. They respond to immediate stimuli. They do not appear to mentally rehearse tomorrow's hunt or imagine next winter's food scarcity. Humans do this constantly. And Suddendorf argues that this ability to leave the present moment and inhabit imagined futures is the cognitive foundation of almost everything that makes human civilization possible. Planning, strategy, agriculture, architecture, all of it depends on the ability to simulate a future that does not yet exist. And when does mental time travel happen most readily? When your brain is understimulated, when you are not being bombarded by immediate demands, when you are, in the most clinical sense of the word, bored. The daydreaming state, which neuroscientists now call default mode network activation, is not your brain going offline. It is your brain switching to a different and extraordinarily sophisticated mode of operation, planning, simulating, imagining, building mental models of futures that don't exist yet so that you can navigate toward them more effectively. Early humans, sitting around a fire with nothing immediately pressing to do, were not wasting time. Their brains were running the most advanced software our species has ever developed. There is one more piece of this that almost nobody talks about: play. Anthropologist Stuart Brown spent decades studying play behavior across species and cultures. His conclusion was stark. Play is not a luxury. It is not something that happens when serious business is finished. Play is a primary biological drive, as fundamental to healthy development as sleep or food. And in hunter-gatherer societies, play was not something that stopped at childhood. Adults played. Constantly. Games of skill, games of chance, physical contests, elaborate storytelling games that went on for hours around the fire. Humor, imitation, performance. Brown argues that adult play in prehistoric societies was not entertainment in the modern sense. It was practice. Every game of throwing a spear at a target was rehearsal for hunting. Every storytelling session around the fire
was practice for the social negotiation and coalition building that determined survival. Every physical contest was a low-stakes test of the capacities that high-stakes situations would demand. Boredom created the space for play, and play quietly built the skills that kept the group alive.
Now, here is where this stops being ancient history. Your brain is the same brain. The neural architecture that produced those ochre engravings 75,000 years ago is the architecture you are running right now. The default mode network that activated when early humans sat by the fire with nothing to do activates in you the moment your phone is out of reach and your environment stops demanding your attention. And here is what modern neuroscience has found about what happens in that state. In 2014, researchers at the University of Virginia ran a study in which participants were placed in an empty room with nothing to do for 15 minutes. They were given one option to interrupt the boredom if it became unbearable: a button that would deliver a mild electric shock to their own leg. 67% of male participants chose to shock themselves rather than sit alone with their thoughts. They chose pain over the discomfort of an unoccupied mind.
This is what happens to a brain designed for creative restlessness when it is given restlessness, but no outlet for creation. The discomfort is real. The agitation is real. But the response, reaching for the nearest stimulation regardless of its quality, is the opposite of what that state was designed to produce. Early humans, sitting in the same neurological state, reached for ochre and shells and stories and games. We reach for our phones. The capacity that built civilization is still inside you. Every time your brain signals that it is understimulated, it is not malfunctioning. It is not a problem to be solved with the nearest available distraction. It is the same signal that once produced the first art, the first music, the first tools elaborate enough to change the world. The question is not how to eliminate boredom. The brain that cannot tolerate boredom is a brain that has lost access to its most creative state. The question is what you reach for when it arrives.
100,000 years ago, a human being sat down with nothing to do, and they made something. That impulse is still running in you. It has been waiting every time you reflexively reached for your phone for you to let it do what it was built to do.